My name is Young Tae Choi. I'm a minister in the Presbyterian Church in Canada. Recently, I serve Richmond Presbyterian Church in Richmond, alongside leading one art ministry called the Poeo Center, too. And I have one wife, and we have a little daughter, and we live in Langley. And I'm so passionate about working in the intersection between art, theology, and culture. So that's what I mostly do with Poeo Center. Yeah. From my perspective and in my observation, the Korean community in the Greater Vancouver is very, very closely connected to local churches, local immigrant churches in many, many ways. So it's hard to talk about the Korean community without the Korean immigrant church, in that the Korean churches, shape the Korean community into what it is today. So, for example, the first immigrant generation, Korean immigrant generation here, built the church and built the Korean community within the church. They met people there. They did business with church people and got help and gave help through church people. Even they continue to pass down the Korean culture through the church. I served Vancouver Korean Presbyterian Church, where I served before, which is one of the oldest Korean immigrant church in the Greater Vancouver. They did, when I was there, they did annual Korean culture event in the church. Invited 1.5 or second gen Korean Canadians, kids, and let them experience Korean culture, what it was, such as New Year's traditional games, making traditional food, watching Korean movies, etc. Also, they run a Korean language school, through the Korean immigrant churches. So once per week, kids learned Koreans in the church right before Sunday worship service begin. So Sunday school teachers also help, involve that school, teaching and helping kids to learn Korean culture and Korean language, etc. So the Korean community here is very closely related to, Korean immigrant church. 1.5 generation and second generation, they are, have some difference between the first generation in terms of language, in terms of, cultural involvement in this society. This is another, topic to talk. And I'm, even though the Korean churches do try to the best, their best to make some bridge between, the first gen and second gen, through that kind of programs in the church, but still, there are some things to, to reserve, such as generation gap, as you experience, and a lot of other ethnic, immigrant generation families they experience. So even, in the church where I served, we planted one, like a next gen, English ministry under the first gen, Korean immigrant church. But still, there was difficulties to, work out because the ministry, even though we had some pastor who understood, 1.5 or second gen culture and languages, 1.5 pastor, but still there was difficulties to cultivate that kind of ministry because that means still under the first gen leadership and still under the first gen culture, governance. So I found out a successful 1.5 or second gen ministry usually have their own, leadership an independent ministry away from the first-gen leadership, later on. First of all, it's hard to answer to the question because it depends on what kind of drama you have watched, right? So, because there are a lot of Korean dramas these days, produced by Netflix, right? And some are very suspensive, stories. Some are very romantic, right? Different kind of stories there. But one thing that I can tell here is, yes, I can see similarities. Between Korean Canadians and what you see some Korean characters in the Korean dramas. In terms of Jung, which is in Korean. And if I translate it in English, maybe, how to say, it's a grace or a friendship. I don't know. It's really hard to explain this in English because there is no that kind of concept in English. So, for example, when people watch Korean dramas, they I don't know, it's really hard to pick just one drama here, but Korean people help others very generously. People are generous, acceptable, are willing to help without some kind of assumption that because I help you, you have to help me later. We don't have that kind of a concept in that word, Jung. In Korean stories, in the Korean drama, they work and they do something based on that kind of concept. So I don't know. It's hard to explain, but that is maybe one of the best, very Korean mindset. To describe why these people act that way, why people, that character act that way, in their romantic relationship, when their relationship with co-workers, when their relationship with strangers. So I can see that definitely first generation in the church. And also the church has a similar virtue that, we definitely need to help others. Regardless of their background, their education, we need to help others who in need, that kind of love. So even though non-Christians, non-Christian Korean Canadians have that kind of mindset in their workplace. So so I can tell, yes, there are some similarities in between Korean Canadians and what the drama describes, in their, some characters there, Because my parents, when I was young, they both worked. So my older brother and I really enjoyed drawing at home. Even in school, elementary school, we draw, a textbook on the side. We really enjoyed drawing, expressing our imagination in pencils. And we got some opportunity to continue, develop that kind of artistic skills in the church. We did some video producing for worship, and we went to Indonesia, other part of countries to tape a mission videos project. So naturally, when we grew up, all the different artistic skills, we just naturally learned day by day. We really interested in exploring, that kind of world. And so that kind of experience, led me to, art university. And my major was visual art, a modern art. So I really loved expressing my thought and concept in visual, language. But at some point, I was really disappointed by the movement of the modern art because it was really hard to communicate it to those who are not educated regarding, visual culture, visual art, because only people, can access to that kind of work in the modern art galleries, and a lot of abstract, work there, I felt like it's really not connected to a real world. So I shifted my interest into filmmaking, especially documentary filmmaking. So I made some documentary regarding someone, who was a Christian, but who worked as a soft porn actor, not actress, and his life. And then I also got into, major film industry, like a big budget, industry as well. All that, the kind of a journey, I was occupied with one thing, all that during that years, making, teaching art to students and film world. I needed to study theology. Before coming to Vancouver, I was planning to, I already accepted, from Trinity Western University because I wanted to study Christian philosophy and Christian worldview. That school has that program. But just right before going there, I was involved in a film project called, in English, Love and Word. Just 3 days before the production completed, the movie is about Korean War, so we use a lot of rear guns imported from Hong Kong. And every day, police officers check the, count every guns, or make sure everything is okay. No one is steal. One day, just 3 days before the production completed, one of the guns was blasted before my face. So I lost my eye vision, in my right eye for a month. And I got serious surgery, and during the time, I sensed it. I didn't, I wasn't disappointed by losing my sight. I was very in peace, and this is something God was working in my life, and I realized God wanted me to, step out from the film industry, because the side effect from the surgery was I couldn't see any bright screen, like a computer screen, cell phone screen, a television screen. So that means I couldn't work for the film industry anymore. So anyway, so that moment led me to think about other possibility. I mean, I already got admission from the Trinity University, but that school didn't have a ministry major. But after the surgery, that kind of time, meditation, and I realized God wanted me to study something else, and I found a regional college, and I came. But I end up, studying like a pastor program, later. Went to South Korea to see my mother, and I have 1 month and a half, about 45 days, spending time with her. And one day she told me, Young Tae, I know your desire. You want to make a life-giving art. and I know your desire to write a book, art of theology, whatever. I know your desire, but why don't you be help Christian artists in pastor way? But I already spent 3 years here. I spent most of my money, my bank account, like zero balance. And I have no energy to study more because studying, theology at master level in my second language was so difficult. So I couldn't accept my mother's suggestion, but my mother is a prayerful person, so I decided to just keep in my mind, but yet not to decide. So anyway, I went back to Vancouver, to complete my program, but I wanted to pray about that. Lord, is that your way for me? Like going into church ministry. I have no extra money. I have no desire to study more. So I just prayed for that. And one day I had some special dream. I don't usually dream, but that night I had a special dream. And that dream consists of 3 chapters, like a movie. So first chapter is about like a war. So a lot of soldiers, kill each other. And a second chapter is about the church, the first church when I attended when I was like 5 years old. Elders, they gathered in the church sanctuary, main sanctuary, at the center of main sanctuary, and they were trying to build some stages, which looked to me in my dream weird. Oh, this is not right. Something is very wrong. Going on there. And the last chapter is about church retreat. So like on the mountain, there's a church, like some retreat center. All the different ethnic people at different ages, different backgrounds, they gather and worship together. And I saw at the corner of the room, demon is there, and I jumped and took him and cast out him from that group. And then when I back to the worship, how people were there. One of the people whose name is Joshua, when I met in real world, at school, Regent College, he's an Indian pastor, he's a little bit older than me, and he comes to me and saying, Young Tae, you think church is useless? And I say, yes, church is useless. And he say, but because of church, there is a hope in the world. And then, my dream, end. And my body was very, trembled, and I knelt down, and I prayed, Lord, okay, I got it. You have some plan. I don't know what it is, but you have some plan in the church. My interest always outside of the church, culture and film world, art world. I never thought about working or doing something inside a church, but that dream pointed out to me, Young Tae, you have something to do inside a church. So then, I wrote some journal, in the middle of night. This is what I, these are 3 chapters. I dreamed 3 chapters, and these dreams maybe point out this. And this is what I know is that God has some plan for me to do something inside a church. So that's some kind of very important point in my life, because it's shifting my life direction, from doing something outside the church into doing something inside the I had some desire, relating to artists. Even though I was working for traditional a church ministry, I always desired to do something for artists. Because I saw two extreme Christian artists when I leading a Christian art club, when I was a student. One extreme was, they couldn't find their own place to speak their own faith in the secular school. The secular school, they didn't like a Christian art, So one group, end up like living, giving up their artistic gift because they didn't find any place to speak, their Christian faith in main world. So they just went into seminaries or Christian organization to work. And the other group was, they just decided to compromise their own faith with like a postmodern mindset that sometimes like opposite Christian faith to be successful artist. So I found out maybe there is some kind of need in between the Korean church and artists, Christian artists. They really needed to build up trust and conversation in between two different worlds. So I wanted to study theology, not only because like it help Christian artists, but because as I'm an artist, I needed to make sure how like a creative vocation and Christian faith, how they work together, And I found out when I got ordained in the Presbyterian Church, Canada, Richmond Presbyterian Church there. The more I engaged in Western churches, especially like mainline denomination, Presbyterian Church Canada, United Church, Anglican Church, they all struggling about like cultivating next generation ministry. Those churches are aging. A lot of church closed. So I realized maybe this is a good time to start art ministry. Doing something for artists, pastoring them, cultivating their artistic gifts, and making something very meaningful or life-giving art into the culture, and also, helping local churches who, are struggling, with doing something like a creative, especially like mainline denomination. So 2 years ago, I initiated the art ministry whilst working for Richmond Presbyterian Church, receiving some grant from the National Church. So I started investing my life into art ministries.